Paris, summer of 1789. A baker lifts the wooden shutter on his shop at sunrise. The bread inside is still warm, and a crowd is already waiting, not for a celebration, for survival. The price of bread has doubled again. People are desperate. Soldiers stand nearby, trying to keep order. They can't. By noon, the crowd spills into the street. By dusk, the crisis spreads beyond Paris. And within weeks, the entire political system will collapse. Most people think the French Revolution began in the streets. But it didn't. It began long before the riots, and France was not alone. Russia in 1917, Cuba in 1959, different leaders, different ideologies, different slogans, but the same collapse, driven by the same structural failure. Money. Revolutions do not fail because their ideals are wrong. They fail because they break the machine that keeps an economy working. And beneath the chaos, there is a cycle, a 6-stage engine that appears again and again. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. This is the revolution cycle. Now we begin with stage 1, fiscal pressure. Revolutions do not begin with crowds. They begin with ledgers. Stage 1 starts when a government cannot pay its bills. And once that happens, everything else begins to warp. France spent decades fighting expensive wars. North America, Europe, everywhere. By the late 1780s, the treasury was drowning. Half of all revenue went to interest payments. The people who could have helped, the nobility and the church, were exempt from taxes. So the burden fell on those least able to carry it. That is the trigger no one sees. The quiet breakdown. The financial system cracking under pressure. Russia reached stage 1 during World War I. The Tsar tried to fund a modern war with a financial system that was not modern at all. Taxes lagged, borrowing failed, so the government printed rubles. The money supply tripled between 1914 and 1917. In Cuba, the pressure came from collapsing sugar prices. Government revenue collapsed with them. The system no longer worked for ordinary people. But elites remained insulated. Different stories, same structure. When a government loses control of its finances, it begins distorting the economy just to survive. Stage 1 is the silent stage, but it is where every revolution is born. Now we enter stage 2, the spark. Stage 2 is when the pressure becomes visible. In France, the spark was the calling of the Estates General. The king needed money. He needed approval for new taxes. At the same time, bread prices surged, harvests failed, families struggled to eat. In Russia, the spark came in February 1917. People stood in freezing lines for bread. Women walked off factory floors. Soldiers refused orders. The Tsarist state could no longer supply basic food. In Cuba, the spark was more diffuse. Urban bombings, crackdowns. A middle class watching wages stagnate while costs climbed. Different countries. Same ignition point. Revolutions erupt when the cost of living breaks, when survival becomes unaffordable. When the government cannot fix it, the spark is not ideological, it is visceral. Now stage 3, radicalization. The old regime collapses, a new leadership steps in, and suddenly they face a brutal question. How do we rebuild the economy? This is where revolutions begin experimenting with money. France created the assignat, a paper currency backed by confiscated church land. The idea seemed elegant: issue notes against land, stabilize the economy. But the government needed money immediately: wars, uprisings, administrative costs. So they printed more assignats, and more and more. The restraint vanished. Russia went further. The Bolsheviks tried to abolish money entirely. War communism replaced markets. Grain requisitioning replaced trade. Prices were set by decree. Supply collapsed. Cuba centralized pricing and foreign exchange. Pegged the peso far above real value. Nationalized industries. Assumed that political control meant economic control. But here is the mistake every revolution makes. Political victory does not give you economic power. Markets do not care who won the revolution. They care about incentives. Break the price mechanism. And the coordination system falls apart. Now stage 4, the power vacuum. This is the stage that turns instability into collapse. Because revolutions do not create unity. They create factions. In France, moderates and radicals battled for control. The assignat collapsed. Inflation surged. Confidence evaporated. In Russia, civil war erupted. Warlords, foreign armies, dozens of factions. Money lost meaning. People bartered to survive. In Cuba, Castro moved fast to fill the vacuum. But centralization came with a cost. Price controls replaced markets. A dual currency system emerged, one official, one real. Here is the structural break. When governments cannot collect taxes, they improvise. They print money, or they confiscate resources. Either way, confidence collapses faster. Stage 4 is where a revolution stops being about ideals and starts being about survival. Now, Stage 5, the monetary experiment. This is the point of no return. France tried to enforce the assignat by law. Shops were ordered to accept it. Gold was banned. Refusing assignats could be punished by death. But you cannot legislate value. The assignat collapsed, savings evaporated. Russia pushed even harder. If money was the problem, they would eliminate money. But scarcity does not disappear with ideology. Without prices, there was no allocation, no signals, no guidance for production. Black markets surged. Factories fell silent. Urban workers starved. Cuba lived inside its experiment for decades. An official peso with little meaning. A second currency for real value. Rationing as a permanent feature. Two parallel economies, both inefficient. Why does this stage break revolutions? Because every revolution underestimates the same thing. Prices are not numbers. They are signals, instructions, how much wheat to plant, how much bread to bake. Where labor should go, where capital should go, destroy the signals, and the economy loses its ability to coordinate. This is the heart of the cycle. When the monetary system fails, everything else fails with it. Now Stage 6, disillusion and reset. The final stage is quiet. It is the moment when reality reasserts itself. In France, revolutionary chaos gave way to Napoleon. One of his first major acts was monetary. He created the franc germinal, a stable currency, predictable value. In Russia, Lenin reversed course, introduced the new economic policy, reopened small markets, allowed peasants to sell surplus grain, a concession to reality. In Cuba, the reset never fully arrived. The dual currency distortions continued. Rationing became normal. The revolution survived politically. But economically, it stagnated. Stage 6 is not about defeat. It is about recognition. Monetary experiments cannot override economic laws. Money is a technology, a coordination tool, a system for managing value across time and space. Break that system, and the political project breaks with it. Here is the 6-stage cycle. Stage 1, fiscal pressure. Stage 2, the spark. Stage 3, radicalization. Stage 4, power vacuum. Stage 5, the monetary experiment. Stage 6, disillusion and reset. France, Russia, Cuba, not exceptions. Examples. Revolutions do not collapse because they reject old ideas. They collapse because they break the monetary systems that keep complex societies functioning. This is not about predicting what comes next. It is about understanding the pattern that repeats when those systems fail. Revolutions do not rewrite economic laws, they collide with them. So the real question is this. When pressure builds in any system, do we recognize the early stages, or do we only see the pattern after the collapse? This is Money Margins. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.